friends. Welcome to a digital lesson about the anatomy of sheet music. Anatomy refers to the parts of something. So usually we hear that word when we're talking about our bodies, like certain muscles, like your diaphragm or your lungs or your ribs. But we're going to use that term today to talk about parts of your sheet music. You all have had sheet music in your hands recently, and we are planning to use it to start singing real music, not just practice music or warm-up music or skills-based music, but actual performance music in the next few days. We just were thwarted by a sudden and unexpected change in plans. So grab your attached assignment. Your slide should look very, very similar to this one. This is a copy or a sample copy of a piece of music, and we're going to talk through the parts of it. The parts and understanding the parts of the music will help you have a better understanding of how and when you should be singing. At first glance, this just looks like a bunch of lines and dots, like it's kind of a mess, right? But it's actually a graph of the sound. So let's talk through parts of the graph. Right here is the most basic information about this piece of music, and that's the title. This is the Hallelujah Chorus from a larger work called The Messiah. We very often hear the Hallelujah Chorus around Christmas time, around church events, etc. But what's really interesting is the man who wrote this, George Friedrich Handel, actually wrote it for Easter. But we typically hear it around Christmas time. I'm sure that you are familiar with this piece of music, but if not, I have embedded a video of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing it, so you can hear the entire Hallelujah Chorus, even though this slide is showing just an example portion. So here is the title of the actual song. Over here, always on the upper right-hand side above the very first staff of the music, is the name of the composer. So like books have authors, right? TV shows have producers, plays have playwrights, music has composers. And so the person responsible for composing or writing this beautiful piece of music, their name always goes right here in the upper right-hand corner. In this case, the composer is George Friedrich Handel. You sometimes hear people say George Frederick Handel. He was born in Germany, but spent most of his life living in England. And so sometimes you hear the more German version of his name, and sometimes you hear the more English version of his name. Both are correct. So the most basic pieces of information are the title and the composer. And from there, to me at least, things start getting more interesting because it's the actual music itself. Above the top left, we have what is called the tempo. The tempo is the speed of the beat. Now, the beat is that always steady, consistent pulse that exists in all music, just like you have found from me 1,000 times in class, snapping it or tapping it out, right? It is the way we measure time in music. But sometimes we can make the speed be really slow. We would maybe call that largo. And we could have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or we could have something that's more medium. We would call that moderato. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or in this example, the tempo is allegro, which means fast. So the speed of the beat will more be like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But in those three examples of the tempo, notice that within each example, the beat was steady and consistent. So above the top left here, we have the tempo or the speed of the beat. Now, speaking of the beat, right here, see these numbers all stacked up? That's called a time signature, or some people call it the meter signature. Both are 100% correct. They're synonyms. You can say time signature or you can say meter signature. But those are the rules for how we are going to group the beats. Because this has a 4 in the top part of the time signature, we know that the beats are going to happen in groups of 4. Look right here. We've got a whole rest. 1, 2, 3, 4. We got a whole rest. 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got a whole rest. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a dotted quarter note for 1.5 beats, an eighth note for half a beat, 2 more eighth notes at half a beat each, and a quarter rest at 1 beat. That adds up to 4. This time signature or meter signature is telling me how we're going to group the beats. And in this specific case, there's going to be 4 beats in each section of the staff. Down here, these little like hashtag looking things, they're actually in music called sharps. Sometimes you see down here in the same place some little like italic looking B's. Those are called flats. But regardless of which symbol is here, when we have these sharps or we have these flats, that tells us the key signature or the order of the pitches we're going to use to sing. We need to make sure all of our singers and all of our instrumentalists are tuned to each other, and we make sure that happens by using the key signature. You should be familiar with this part. These grouped together with the boring kind of square bolded bracket are the voice parts. That's the part we're most interested in. We are singers, y'all. But notice the 4 voice parts are bracketed together, and then there's a long skinny line connecting it with the sideways mustache looking bracket to the accompaniment. And in this example, there's a piano. Accompaniment is the background music, what exists to support the singers, right? So in this case, it is the piano. The accompaniment comes from the piano. But up here, we have our voices. You should be familiar with some of these. They are grouped from highest voices to lowest voices. So we have a staff for our soprano singers. That's our absolutely highest voices. That's like me. I have a very high voice. Next, we got a little bit lower. We have our altos. Those are more medium voices. Then we have tenors, got a little bit lower. That is the start of low voices. And then down here we have bass. It totally looks like bass, like the fish, but in music we say bass. And those are our lowest voices. In our choirs, because we're a middle school choir, we don't typically see tenor and basses. We see a kind of medium combo group called baritone. So in this example, we have our highest voices soprano, medium voices alto, low voices tenor, and lower voices bass. And again, they are stacked from highest stuff to lowest stuff. And let me just remind you, although there's not a blank to answer this in the score, anything that is stacked up in the grand staff happens at the exact same time. So right here, all of these things, all 6 of these things are happening at the exact same time. That's how we get the different layers of sound. So for example, I'm a soprano, so I'd be reading along. I'd sing hallelujah. And then where do I go? I have to drop all the way down to my next soprano staff in the grand staff, because all these other things down here, they already happened. They were happening at the exact same time I was singing, y'all. See this little cursive F right there? And it shows up on each staff. That represents the dynamics or the volume. So when you see little letters like this in the staff, F means forte, which means loud. Down here, look, there's another example, 2 Fs. That is fortissimo. That means really loud. Or sometimes you see like a P for piano, which means soft, or 2 Ps for pianissimo, which means very soft. Or sometimes you see like MF. Don't make bad jokes, y'all. That stands for mezzo forte. That just means medium loud. So these are the dynamics, the volume at which we are meant to be singing or performing. these little sections of the staff, and look, there's like dozens of them on this page, but see this little section of the staff? It's like between these two long skinny lines. That's called a measure. So we got a measure here, and a measure here, and a measure here, and a measure here. Each little section of the staff we call a measure. And that just exists to kind of chunk our information together into small, usable pieces of information. Like if there weren't measures, you could still totally read this. It'd be fine. It would just be more cumbersome because you get a big whoosh of information all at one time instead of just, here's a little bit of info. Here's a little bit of info, that makes it a little bit easier to process. So each little section of the staff we call a measure, or my grandmother, her accent is even worse than mine, y'all. She calls it a measure. Sometimes you see numbers in the staff, and those are measure numbers. And we sometimes number our measures so it's easier for us to communicate with each other. Like it's real easy if I say, okay, we're going to start at the beginning, y'all. You just find the beginning of the staff, the very beginning of the song, and away we go. But sometimes when we're rehearsing, we have to stop and start and work on little trouble spots or bring out the best in something. And we don't want to start all the way back at the beginning every single time, right? We just want to work on maybe this small little section. So I could say, for example, right here, y'all find measure 90. That's where we are going to be starting. And you know that we can ignore everything that came before it, and we're just going to be practicing this little section. So right here, these are measure numbers, and they're just numbering the little sections of the staff so that we, again, have smaller, easier to use pieces of information. Those little lines that divide the staff into measures, like right here or right here, we call those bar lines. And like I've already said twice, they exist to chop the staff into small sections called measures because that gives us smaller, easier to use pieces of information at one time. But if you'll look over here, look right here. See how the bar line's a little different? Instead of being one skinny line, we have one skinny line, and then we have this like a thicker line. That has a really creative name. Are you ready? It's called a double bar line. Ooh. So we have bar lines like this, and then we have the very creatively named double bar line. Do you know what the double bar line means? It means the end. It means we're done. It's like the punctuation at the end of a sentence, right? You get to the end of a sentence and there's a period, and you know that we are done. So this is like a big old musical punctuation mark. This double bar line means the end. There is no music past this. Some of y'all ask questions about these symbols in class, but these are called clefs. And clefs exist to tell us more about the pitch. This symbol has two names, treble clef or G clef, and we use it to designate the highest sounds. And then down here, this also has two names, the F clef or the bass clef, and we use it to designate the lowest sounds. So look up here. Our sopranos and our altos, our highest and our medium voices, they have the G clef because their sound tends to overall just be a little bit higher. Our basses, they are the lowest, and so they have that F clef because they're going to be singing low sounds. So we give them a clef that designates low sounds. They're kind of like compasses. They get us pointed in the right direction. So sopranos, you might want to take a second and practice following the soprano line in the grand staff and notice what clef is there. Altos, you might want to practice the same thing. Practice reading just the alto staff and the grand staff. Tenors, basses, or we would call baritones, because we have the combo group since we're in middle school. You can practice following along with one of those voice parts. And then hopefully you're looking at this and going, oh yeah, now that I know what all those symbols are and what they're doing, this actually makes a lot of sense. I am really comfortable following along with my voice part in the staff, and I'm really comfortable knowing the special things that I will need to rehearse, like the dynamics or the volume, the speed the beat is going to go, how the beats are grouped, who's providing my accompaniment, who is the background music, where are we starting in the score or in the staff? Oh, you want me to start at this measure number. And then at the end, oh, the double bar line. It means we are finished. It means we did good work. So follow along with this video, make sure that you have completed each text box with the attached slides, and then you should turn it in, 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 turn it in. Please hit submit.